Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 8th and final webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. Today, we'll be discussing the importance of stewardship within your fundraising strategy. First, I'll introduce you to who we are. Cogeo is the leading expert in the sports nonprofit industry. Our management team has 70 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. And one reason why we're particularly passionate about working with sports and soccer clubs like yourselves is that our leadership has both played and coached soccer. And that includes Rob Cusell, who is your speaker today. As a college All-American and highly successful soccer coach, Rob is now the managing director of consulting services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And with that, I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thanks, Mel. So you can see from slide number 3, this is the 8th and final webinar of this series. And now stewardship is probably the most important piece, and let me tell you why. So we know that the entities that will consider giving to clubs, academies, leagues, governing bodies are high net worth individuals, businesses, corporations, foundations, and government agencies, right? And generally speaking, the negotiation, the ask, happens once a year, right? That's usually the norm. It doesn't matter which of the entities is put in play. And therefore, it's really important to have good stewardship between asks from year to year. So the activity between asks is really the thanking and the engaging and the cultivating and the ongoing education of the donor beyond just having made their gift. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to focus specifically on methodologies and tactics around each of the rooms within the House of Development. So let's go to the next slide. So you can see stewardship, slide number 4, sits on top of the house. With the transformational gift, it becomes the roof of the house in that it really protects everything from falling apart, literally. And so it's really important to consider and to execute this from a year to year. So next slide, what are the goals and context for today? We're going to define it for each room, as I mentioned. We're going to talk about the relevance of stewardship, thanking donors, in the context of each room of the House of Development. Readiness, make sure that the organization is doing best business practices as it relates to stewardship in all fundraising areas. And then data management. The good news is we put our clients on Salesforce if they already don't have a customer relation management system. Now, all of you clubs have membership systems, but this is different. This is tracking donor and donor activity across a lifetime. And current systems, including Salesforce, have reminders that automatically pop up and help. So that's really convenient. So data is actually very important to consider. So the next slide, let's define stewardship, right? So what is it? In essence, it's the act performed by an agency with a donor after a donor has contributed to an organization that aim to indirectly or directly validate the purpose for the contribution as well as promote the likelihood of additional contribution from the donor in the future. And moves management, which we discussed in the major gift webinar, and if you haven't heard that, you should be sure to go back and listen to it. Moves management is a series of intentional donor-centric moves to keep a donor invested in an agency over time, which is to say, if you get a large foundation grant, you want to put moves on the foundation every quarter so that they understand that their gift is making an impact. That's what moves management is. Okay, so now we're going to speak specifically about each room from the bottom up. Right? We'll start with retail, with annual giving and membership giving, and then we'll go to events, and then we'll move up into the clubhouse. So what are the types of stewardship that we see in annual giving? Well, there's the formal email or the formal letter from the agency. That has to be done. So at a minimum, there should be one email. Generally, they're auto-generated by the donation transaction engine, which is on your website. On top of that, number 2, we recommend that there be additional acknowledgments and that they are donor-centric, which is to say, if there are board members who know this particular donor or business or foundation, they should augment. They should add to the just the regular formal thank you. Third thing, agency updates. So consistent messaging from the executive director, the technical director, the DOC, and others. And this has obviously moved much more toward digital now. Key stakeholders. We do with our clients quarterly agency newsletters at a minimum. And in there's storytelling, blogs, updates, and generally now it's all digital, very little paper, if any. Also digital storytelling through your website, through videos, and repositories of program information and data through your website again. So your website becomes a critical tool in terms of stewarding donors and making sure that they're up to date on what's going on within the club. Social media content, most clubs do a good job with that. And then annual reports, and if you're going to do an annual report, it needs to be online, certainly not on paper. So the next slide, number 8, is a good example of a thank you letter. And this is a format thank you letter. You'll note that there are no numbers in terms of the quantification of the gift, but those can get plugged in. It's very simple, 3 paragraphs. And this is San Francisco United Football Club Foundation. They're a for-profit club that we've established a foundation for them that's been raising money now for, I think, 8 or 9 months. And in this case, it comes from the board chair and the vice chair. And it's essentially just a thank you for the generous gift. And you know, here's what your gift's going to do. And the second paragraph talks about updating them periodically. And then if you have any questions, contact us. So it's simple, but it does the job. Okay, next slide. Again, the second retail part, which is events. And there are really 3 key areas to consider. There's a pre-event, the in-event, and then the post-event. And these, obviously, these events take the form of galas, cultivation event, virtual events, fun, you know, golf outings, and then we like soccer-thons a lot, or juggle-thons, or a combination of soccer-thon and juggle-thon, which is a really good thing. And if you want to learn more about that, go back to the event webinar. There's a solid discussion about soccer-thons. So pre-event, if you're bringing in auction lots, or if you're bringing in raffle items or sponsorship from businesses, you need to thank them immediately once it comes in, because most nonprofits won't. They'll wait till after the event. That'll make a big difference, and you'll stand out. So immediate recognition and acknowledgement for any asset acquired for the event prior to the event. In event, like as the event occurs, there needs to be signage, recognition, making sure that you're promoting all your sponsors, you know, etc. So there, it's just a matter of making sure you've got everything in place for maximum output in terms of recognizing all donors, whether they were individuals, whether they were businesses, larger corporations, or even foundations, and even city, park and rec, city council, etc. Post-event stewardship, everybody who participated, including volunteers, should get a post-event description of its success, what the impact was, how much was raised, etc. And then for those who actually gave to the event at whatever level, there should be donor-centric moves on a quarterly basis in terms of moves management and that rotation. Next slide, number 10, is a really good example of Orlando City. They did their soccer-thon 2 months ago. And so this is the recap that went to everybody, whether they were volunteers, coaches, kids, parents, everybody. In this case, it's a 4-paragraph. The first paragraph, first annual club-wide success, result netted 75,000. And then it describes which areas are going to be benefited, 2 areas, allocation for financial aid assistance, and then allocation to assist with the build out or renovation of the Seminole Soccer Complex, which is the big effort that we're working on with them. And then third is they're recognizing a woman by the name of Meg, who led the whole thing. She was incredible. And so she deserves special recognition, which is what happens there. And then the last paragraph is all encompassing, thanking everybody and looking forward to the following year and having similar success in 2022. Not bad for year one, 75,000, considering there was only about 50% club-wide participation. So it's a great result for year one, and we're looking forward to actually doubling that next year. Okay, next slide, number 11, corporations and foundations. Now, we've coupled those because it's the same stewardship practices. Now, why? Because businesses and foundations, or at least the community relations arm of the business, or the sponsorship arm of the business, that could be the same person as the CEO who wears many hats, but they are in the business of giving. That's what they do, and therefore they need good stewardship because you're competing with other 501c3s who may also be getting sponsored or getting donations from the foundation. So here it becomes even more important with corporations and foundations to do a very effective job because particularly foundations, that's what they do. They give away money, therefore they expect strong stewardship. So 3 critical areas. The first is quarterly updates from the director of development, if there is one, the executive director, or the technical director. And it's really an annual contribution divided by 4, done on a quarterly basis. So if the transaction comes in May 20th, there'll be the formal thank you and hopefully other thank yous. And then 3 months later, in August 20th, there should be something that goes out. And then 3 months later, around Thanksgiving, there should be something that goes out. And then 3 months later in February, 3 months prior to making their 2022 gift, hopefully, then there should be a last thank you. And in those, you basically describe how the funds were managed over that quarter. And then success and stories, always helpful, storytelling around that. If significant milestones were achieved, you want to make sure you communicate that, particularly if you've got contractual obligations to a foundation in terms of reporting, which is not unusual at all. And then you also, particularly with the corporate, they want to know what your reach is, right? So for example, we're working with Cal North, the governing body for Northern California, and they've got a membership of over 250,000. Now that's going to play well as we go out and raise corporate dollars, given their reach and the demographics of their reach. So we put together a deck that really speaks to businesses around reach, return on investment, et cetera. So make sure that you keep track of metrics and all the stuff you're doing in social media. And for all of our clients, beyond the case statement, which we've talked about in the past, we also do a corporate deck. Because again, it speaks differently. And if you want to get a sample or 2 or 3 of that, just work with Mel. She'll get you a couple samples. So the next slide, number 12, what does a stewardship letter look like? In this case, it's to the Olympic Club Foundation in San Francisco, which funded one of our clients that works on leadership. And in this case, this is that quarterly update. So they had a link to the documentary, which was just produced, which is really powerful. The reactions were incredible. It's on their website. If you go to empowermeacademy.org, you can view the documentary. It's really amazing. And then just some data on whom they served and all the kids they served, and as well as diversity in terms of the students of color that were, and then the mix of girls and boys. And then the final 3 paragraphs talk about, the impact that they've had in this COVID environment, et cetera. So this is a little more detailed because, again, it's a foundation. And so they expect more. Now, we're giving them a lot here because we're trying to differentiate ourselves from other stewardship pieces that they may get from other people that they funded or other agencies that they funded. This is a very good letter. Next slide, 13. So what do we do with high net worth and major gifts? And again, these are individuals here. We just talked about corporations and foundations. In this instance, we're talking about really understanding what the best practice is for high net worth. Same concept. If a donor has given a major gift, a large gift to the club, then there needs to be, again, quarterly updates, which is if they gave 1,000, it's 1,000 divided by 4. Here's where your $250 did this quarter. supported 3 players on, whatever it did. Make sure they're donor-centric, how the funds were leveraged, and then success stories and results from the application of the funds and the implementation of the programs that were impacted. Again, any significant milestones, as well as making sure that the case statement is updated so that it's relevant for every meeting you're having with this major donor. And the thank you letter, next slide, really should again be a little more detailed, right, than just a general thank you, because these are major donors. They deserve a little more information to make sure that they consider investing in following years. So this is from SPAT, which is a really interesting group out of Oakland, California, that does yeoman's work. Go to their website, SPAAT, and you'll get a sense of what they do. But here it's really just focusing on what is happening at SPAT, the success they had in terms of 2 of their graduates getting drafted into the NFL, Kevin Davidson and Gavin White, and then really just identifying virtual opportunities, knowing where they can make an impact in this new environment that we've been dealing with now for over a year. And then again, just a very specific thank you to that donor for the generous support. So it's a nice letter. It gives data. Obviously, it's not conclusive in terms of its finality, but it gives you an idea of what to include for major donors. So if the club is in a capital campaign, if they're doing a complex build out, field build out, futsal build out, complex renovation, much like what we're doing around the country, this now becomes relevant, because if it's a capital campaign, that means you're focused on a particular area within the club. Generally, it's facilities based. It's not always facilities based. So you need to speak about that specifically in terms of how their gift has made an impact in the growth of the facility. So there are 2 types of campaigns, capital campaigns. And in the soccer world, we generally see only campaign as build-outs. We haven't seen endowment yet. An endowment is a massive reserve fund that you can draw interest off of every year. Universities do this very well as hospitals. If it's a complex or a field or a futsal, there needs to be naming rights, portfolio, as well as for the lesser donors, some kind of acknowledgement through a donor wall or whatever. And then as the campaign progresses, there needs to be constant communication about the milestones and the achievements that are happening within the campaign. Because these capital campaigns are non-linear. It's not like you can't predict what's going to happen. So you need to make sure that you're keeping your donor base informed on the progress of the campaign. And what are these updates? Well, they're, what have we raised incrementally toward the goal? Lead gifts. That should be promoted throughout the duration of the campaign. Another great stewardship would be to have a kickoff event to get everybody excited about the campaign coming up. And soccer-thons are a great method for that in terms of building community awareness and doing kickoffs. Making sure you're promoting all the significant funders to the campaign. That there's generally a campaign has 4 phases: the preparation phase, the lead gift phase, the major gift phase, and then the community phase. So be sure you're communicating how these phases are progressing. Another fun event would be a groundbreaking event. Once you've raised a good amount of money, you can have the first celebration through a groundbreaking event. And then obviously at the end of the campaign, a campaign closing ceremony celebrating the success of whatever endeavor was taken on successfully. And then after the campaign, you want to keep donors informed, because those donors to your capital campaign will remain your larger donors. Therefore, you've got to keep them engaged. And so you want to give them updates on how the facility is transforming the club, and particularly as it relates to economic impact. Now, for capital campaigns around complex build-outs, what we're seeing a lot is real interest on behalf of either it's Park and Rec, or it's City Council, or it's the economic council within the city or county. Could be county. There's a lot of interest in economic development, particularly around increased tax revenue. And the current stimulus package that's being distributed around the country is really focused on infrastructure, broadband in particular, as well as increased tax revenue, which is really just an increased annuity guarantee for city. And so we're seeing some investments, again, around the country of a pretty big scale into projects that are really around renovation and creation. One of our clients in Springfield, Missouri, was just awarded at a minimum $5 million, and it could go up to 10, 12 million for their complex and indoor facility complete renovation. And the motivation for both county and city in this case is economic activity as an economic driver in terms of generating tax revenue. So we're seeing a lot of that real interest, which is great. So what is a strong, I just mentioned Lake Country Soccer, Southwest Missouri Rush. Again, they're in the middle of a capital campaign. And this is a letter that went out to a major donor. And so it's a little more formal because it's capital campaign. In this case, it was a $10,000 gift. They attached they attached the case statement, and this letter comes from a board member, Ryan, who actually solicited this gift from one of his peers in business. And then the disclaimer at the end, which is, this is, we're tax exempt. Here's our EIN number, and no goods and services were received, which is really important to capital campaign because there needs to be transparency in terms of making sure that all of the transactions are actually going to the project. So it's a good letter. And then in addition to that letter, there were a lot of just personalized thank yous from different board members, from John Markey, the executive director, but this was the core. But again, you want to have as many thank yous as possible. And then the penultimate slide here is really around a transformational gift, right? So if the city, when the city commits 5 to 10 million, 12 million, that's transformational, right? Because that will allow them to do the project, 12 fields and a stadium and an indoor complex, not in a phased approach, so taking 5, 6, 10 years, but immediately, beginning literally this summer, with the idea of being operational by next spring, fully operational by next spring. And so this is a full turf out, full lights on every single field. Each field can be named. And so how are we going to steward that? Well, we're going to let the city know exactly which events are coming in, how much economic activity they're going to drive, and just steward them around why they invested in the project, which was really around the fact that economic activity needed to and was going to increase. So that is a transformational gift, and that's how you want to steward it in that case. Now, generally, these are highly personal updates, by the way. Not more than an email. It's really even an in-person meeting where you're really bringing them up to speed. And then it's constant stewardship over the lifetime of the legacy of that gift. And it needs to be really consistent in terms of honoring the gift in perpetuity and making sure that they're getting the right updates. Now, if they've created an endowment fund, then you need to deal it almost like an investment fund, where you get monthly updates on the performance of the fund and how much money it's given out on an annual basis. So it's very similar to a money manager who would report back to her client about the performance of their whatever fund, mutual fund, or et cetera. So that's how that gets done. Really important. And we don't have any sample letters here because it is truly personal and highly, highly face-to-face in terms of interaction. Because again, these are transformational gifts, generally hundreds of thousands, millions, that really make a lifelong impact. And you've seen these types of gifts at your university where a dorm has been named or the science hall has been named. That's what that was. Okay, next slide. This is important because some donors will tell you, please don't thank me. I don't need to be thanked. No, everyone needs to be thanked, and they all like being thanked, even though they may tell you, particularly the socialites, they'll tell you, don't bother thanking me. But stewardship, in conclusion, is the real backbone to good development and fundraising in terms of best business practices. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, it's the most important thing. Getting the gift is easy. It's, hey, John, I want you to consider giving $1,000 to the club this year. You've done your job. You've made the ask. It's what happens between the asks that's critical. When I was at Stanford University in Major Gifts, we had a saying, and that was, the work starts once the gift comes in, which is to say, when that 100,000 or the 10,000 came in from a donor, that's when you really began thinking. You didn't really celebrate. You began thinking about what you were going to do to really make sure that they knew of the impact. Right. So we had all these methodologies and tactics around moves management, specifically around 7 types of donors, because there are 7 types of donors, no matter the wealth. And so who are they? The first type is a communitarian. Doing good makes sense, right? The second type is the religious person, the devout. Doing good is God's will. And that's all about tithing on a Sunday, which is why in retail, individual giving is the majority of giving. It's 70+% of total giving. And much of that is weighed through religion and tithing. Third is the investor. Doing good is good business. I want to invest and I want to make sure that things are happening. The socialite, right? These are people who generally come from money and it's part of their lifestyle. And doing good, giving money away is fun. And the fifth is the altruist. Doing good feels right. It's the right thing to do. I don't want anything out of it, but it just feels good. The sixth type is the repayer, doing good in return. So somebody who had a great experience at your club, who's now an alum, who really wants to see strong things for future generations. This is particularly effective if they now have kids in the club. So they themselves had played as a kid, now they're older, and they have kids who are in the club. We're working with one club out in Northern California, Ballistic United. They've been around for over 50 years, and they actually have an alumni association. And we're seeing these repayers come back and getting involved in the campaign for the futsal build out. And they're getting involved because they want to give back. And so we do see the repayer a lot in clubs, particularly if they're alums of parents. And then the final one is the dynanced. That's the Rockefeller, the Fords, the Dodge, Bill Gates, and his daughter is going to be stuck with this foundation, and she's going to have to deal with it at some point. That or Buffett's kids, but it's a family tradition, and it's something they talk about at the dinner table, and it's really a part of their lifestyle. We're currently dealing with such a dynanced with one of our clients, and it's absolutely fascinating. The conversations that are occurring in terms of their willingness to give away serious money to a right cause. So it's they're around and they exist essentially in every community, naming rights, etc. Well, that's it. I'm going to pass it back to Mel, who's going to close out. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, Mel.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob, for being available today and all the webinars throughout this series. And thanks everybody who's attended and registered, and to the entire Georgia Soccer Club and administration. So there are a couple of different ways that you can continue to implement these tactics that we've talked about over the last few months. You can engage Cogeo and have a conversation with us directly. We're happy to do that. Rob's phone number is at the bottom, and there's a link in here so that you can contact us through our website. We'll set up an exploratory meeting, see how we can be a direct resource for you. We also have several programs set up for organizations that are in a beginning phase for their development process. You can check that out through the link there. We're also happy to have conversations around those. And then we always have our free resources available to you as well. Those are on our website, and we have them on the Georgia Soccer webinar platform. Regarding the platform, we'll keep it up for the foreseeable future. You can access these webinars continuously. If we make any changes, we'll be sure to update Laura and make sure that that information gets out to you. So thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.